You know what he just said, Diego? He said, "I'm a smart dad, so I have a smart son." That's what he's trying to tell you.
Great. Here we are. Finally, Jim,
Greetings.
Ross, thanks for coming.
Yes.
Thanks for doing this. Our first podcast in English, and I'm already,
I'm absolutely humbled by the opportunity.
No, this is gonna be fun. We have a great subject, and is concerned to what Frederic Bastiat wrote in 1850.
Yes.
And it's called The Law. I wouldn't say it's a book. I would say it's a pamphlet.
Yes.
Right.
And that's what it was advertised as in 1850. It was quite popular at that time to have political pamphlets that people wrote and passed about or sold for very, very small amounts of money. Yeah. They would publish them and try and distribute them to get their thought processes out into the public sphere, because obviously there was no internet or television.
Correct.
Or, mass media then.
And that is why such is the title. So it has direct concerns towards the fact that we're alive, the fact that we should be free,
yes.
and that we possess property, private property,
yes,
to be precise. And I think with that, I'll let you expand that thought a little, or a lot. Take as long as you want, because this is the core of that pamphlet, I think.
Yes. So I took the liberty to print some of Bastiat's quotes, because I'm the pamphlet that he wrote and the law, the work that he put together. This is one of the most influential foundational documents for liberty and freedom worldwide. It impacts freedom and liberty in.
I really want people to hear you. So
in every country. So when we quote him, we need to make sure we're quoting him accurately, and
Absolutely.
people understand the terms that he was using and what he meant by certain terms. So in 1850, between the Second and Third French Revolutions, and I encourage people not to take my word for it, the works of Bastiat are widely available on the internet. People can go and look them up and do the research themselves, which is one thing we should all strive to do. We should not be looking to other people to provide us. We can learn from other people, but we should always work the confirmation. Trust
Absolutely.
but verify. So when someone gives us a tip, hey, you need to look at this, you want to say, hey, fantastic, I trust that this is good stuff, but you want to go back and verify that. And we have the power today in today's technology to be able to go back and research this information that Bastiat put together. So in looking at what Bastiat wrote between the Second and Third French Revolutions, he was completely dismayed with the overreach and the power that the government was reaching out and trying to take from the people by limiting people's freedoms, by limiting their liberty, by stealing their property and their hard work. So some years back, I got very interested in this subject and decided, well, I need to know more about this. So I started doing some research, and I came across Bastiat's The Law.
So how long ago was this?
Probably 20 years ago. And immediately when I picked it up, I was absolutely just astounded at how applicable it was to conditions in America today. And that really sparked my interest. There are certain figures within world history who transcend time, and they have the ability to have looked at least far enough forward within their generations or the upcoming generations that they could do works that people would say, how did they have that foresight? How did they look so far in advance and realize they were writing about events that could transpire over, millennia? And so he put this together, and it transcends time. And it's an interesting read, because his premise in the law is life, freedom, and property. And the law is not what the government publishes. The law is not what the government tells you. The law is what the inalienable right that God, you don't have to be a religious person. You could say the creator, you could say a higher power.
The universe.
The universe. He uses the term God, and I'm fine with that. Other people may not be, but these are inalienable rights that you have as a human being that are not provided to you by a government entity, by some written document. They are yours merely for the fact that you exist within this world.
You are alive.
You are alive.
Correct.
Yes.
And you have the right to be.
Correct.
alive.
And you have the right to that liberty, those freedoms, and your property. And your property can mean many different things. It can mean your faculties, your thought processes. It can mean your labor. It can also mean things that you've worked hard to attain: a home, land, a car. It can mean all of those things as well.
Absolutely.
So, and what he was really striving to get people to understand is that the government and or government agencies and or people who will want to form governments are ultimately corrupt almost from day one, because they are trying to take power away from people. The way they take power is they limit their liberty, they limit their freedom, and they take their property.
Exactly.
So I embarked on trying to learn more about this, and then I came across this, and then it took me, this is not for me and what I would say my simple mind, this is not a pamphlet that I could just sit and read through and completely grasp all the concepts. While they're quite simple if you boil them down into simple concepts, he's actually writing something that's fairly complex.
Yeah, make no mistake. When I say pamphlet, I was referring to the size.
Yes.
But the density,
yes,
it's off the charts.
Yes.
It will take you three passes of each essay within that pamphlet.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's
there are a singular sentences, paragraphs, and pages within the pamphlet that will have you just sitting, holding your hand in your head in your hands and saying, "Wow,
Exactly.
What did I just read?"
And by the way, I want to make a parenthesis here, and it's the fact that I came about the law not by chance but by you, and I thank you for that. Probably 3-4 months ago.
Yes,
I would say, and you asked me, have you read the law? You need to read it. Mm-hmm. Because we share a lot of thoughts politically and philosophically and in ideology, I think. And I was mesmerized the fact that it took me 46 years to actually come to this document.
Yes.
And in a way, I was pissed off because you read it 20 years ago. You were already an adult.
Yes, I was.
You were not thought. Nobody taught you these
yes.
when you were 17 or 18 or 20,
mm-hmm.
which I think is the right time to actually learn about this. Neither was I. Mm-hmm. I came probably 30 years late to this document.
Yes.
And that's a question for the people out there. Why they're not teaching us these important concepts
Yes.
from the start? Because you're alive. You're entitled to be alive and to your life, right? You should be free. Nobody should slave you. I think we already came to that conclusion, right? It took a while.
Yes.
And the part that I really like is when he says, your property is an extension of those two things.
Yes.
Is the fact that you're alive and you're free. You can produce goods. They are for you. They come from your mind, from your skills that you have to. These are softwares that you have to upload into your brain. Mm-hmm. So if you have certain trade, if you're a plumber, you have to learn how to be a plumber.
Absolutely.
If you're a pilot, that doesn't happen right away. It takes effort, hard work. That's yours. It's your time. You upload that while you were alive. So that belongs to you, and that's private property.
Yes.
I don't see any way philosophically to actually challenge that. how you challenge that? I mean,
I think what happens is we live in a time in societies, in America and other places. You're from Venezuela originally. I'm from America originally. We live in a time where there are a multitude of distractions in life, and to sit and take a look at something, a work like Bastiat has produced here some 170 years ago, to take a look at this takes effort. And a lot of people are consumed with other things. Sometimes it's work, sometimes it's pleasure, sometimes it's meaningless, mundane. I know we're using YouTube, but YouTube is full of just nonsensical wastes of time, and people can burn endless hours watching hours and hours of people doing things that mean nothing. But yet here's a work. And so you have to really be at a point in your life where you're wanting to seek out that knowledge. And for me, when I came across this, I was absolutely blown away at how many things Bastiat wrote about that I can recall that my father had talked to me about. But yet I wasn't open to listening to. I was listening and I was hearing him, and I appreciate it. I appreciate it now more as a person in their late 50s than I did as a 14, 16, 18-year-old, because I was like, yeah, okay, Dad, because I was thinking I was going to get out into the world and change the world myself. And really what happened was I got out in the world and the world kicked my ass. Right?
Everybody goes through that.
Absolutely. And he warned me, my father warned me of that, but my father talked about liberty and freedom and the fact that I was an individual and I was not, the government was not there to give me rights, that those rights were inalienable and they came from, the Creator. So I was already, understood that, but I wasn't living my life towards that, and that was not the focus of my life, because early in our lives we tend not to be philosophical. We tend to be more action-driven and results-driven, and I need to make this action in order to generate
more practical, yes.
Exactly, these results, and then once I get those results, I can move on to the next action and continue to parlay those one into the other, whether it's building some foundational wealth, and I'm not talking about millions of dollars. I'm just talking about being able to afford to buy your own vehicle, being able to afford to buy food for yourself, being able to pay for your own housing. When we're young, those are the things we're focused on. How do I get an education? How do I get experience that'll lead me to be able to do that? As we get older and we have different life events, we can then start to see, wow, there's more to this, and I need to be more in tune with what is really happening. And 20 years ago, politically in the United States, there were things that were happening. This was sometime just before 9/11, but there were things already happening that I was saying, well, what does all this mean? And I need to understand these things on a different level. And that's really what helped me set out part of my journey, to go and find some of these things.
I think it's amazing that your father installed that software in you early, and even you didn't understood the whole thing, but it got there lingering in your mind, the back of your mind somehow, in your subconscious.
Yes.
The things that your father tells you are important.
Yes.
And I think later in life you actually remember them.
Yes. And for fathers out there who are hearing this, who have young kids, who are struggling to believe that the kids are paying attention, have to remember that our job as fathers, and I've raised 3 young men, our jobs as fathers is to pass on wisdom. That is our command. We're commanded to pass on wisdom. Correct. to create people who are more wise than us. And whether we like the way they react to us passing on the wisdom or not, we still have to continue to pursue it, because eventually those young men that we are raising are going to wake up one day and say, I get it. I understand what he's been telling me now. Right.
I think before that was, in a way, easier to do. I think people will sit around a fire at night.
Yes.
And the elders will talk, and people will listen, and you know,
Yes.
some of them will have fun, but that doesn't happen anymore. There's so many distractions. But
Interestingly enough, you bring that up. I did a project at my home, and I built a large fire pit so
Yeah.
that we could actually sit around a fire pit and talk at night. And there's no TV, there's no radio, there's no music. It's just it's just us, my family, and I sitting around talking about the day's events, what current events are happening, what the ramifications of those events are, what their thoughts are on what their future is and what they want to do.
meaningful stuff.
Meaningful stuff, having meaningful conversations.
Absolutely.
And that is one of the things that if you're ever within a group of people, it's interesting to watch the level of conversations that people have. And you can pick out people who are deep thinkers because they're wanting to have meaningful conversations. And then you can pick out people who are just there for the fun of it, and they're wanting to talk about frivolous things. It's very interesting. But when you get your family focused on having meaningful conversations, it's not to say we would do that 24/7, but when your family gets focused on that, it's amazing that they actually start coming prepared.
Absolutely. Your sons, they're not kids anymore, but
Correct.
but you talk to them about this subject.
Yes.
Yeah.
I've provided a copy of the pamphlet to each of my sons.
And you think they're getting it now at 30, 25, 30
Yes.
years old?
Yeah, I think my oldest, who's approaching, and our oldest is I like to refer to him as our adopted son. He's approaching 40, and he's now starting to actually ask questions about this and get it.
Tell me more. Is he asking?
Yes.
Yeah. Give me more food.
Exactly.
Yeah, there's something about 40 when you want to create a bigger map.
Yes.
I think you're creating maps as you go, right?
Absolutely.
But something happened after 40 that you start creating a more metaphysic map, if you will. Okay, I know the geographical map.
Yes.
I know where everything is. I can place myself within that, but then after that, there's an ideological map and a political map and a philosophical map, and you start getting into that. At least for me, that is what happened, and one of the reasons why these studios exist is to explore that, right? So I think it's fascinating. I have to tell anybody listening to this, you need to go and read the law.
Yes.
And take your time with it.
Yes.
It's just absolutely amazing. One of the things that Bastiat says that for me was also striking is the fact that he says the law should be written to safeguard those three things.
Yes.
Anything that actually that is within the law or any law, and he defines the law as a way to enforce with violence.
Yes.
And he says that, and for me it was like, there's no other way to enforce a law. You enforce it by, and that violent action could be taxation, could be a fee, it could be, whipping. That happened.
Yes.
Cutting your hand,
Absolutely.
hanging, or being in jail.
Yes.
And if you think about it, they all actually striking against these three things. It's life, liberty, and property. You will pay with one of the three.
Yes.
The law.
Yeah.
Right? But the law has been corrupted, right?
Yes.
And that's the part that says, why?
Yes. And that brings up, I've printed some quotes because, as I said earlier, it's important to me how to be accurate with these.
Absolutely.
And the first one I have is from Bastiat in the law. He says, life, liberty, and property do not exist because men have made laws. On the contrary, it was the fact that life, liberty, and property existed beforehand that caused men to make laws in the first place. And I have a parenthetical note there that says the government's job is only to protect our person, his liberty, and his property. That is the number one thing the government's supposed to do, is to be protecting our liberty, freedom, and property. They are not here to socially engineer society.
Wow. But that's not what's happening.
That is
we
correct.
see it all the time. And this is a global scale issue, isn't it?
It
that
is.
we see all governments are trying to tell you how to live, are somehow trying to design society, and less they're trying to safeguard those three principles or those three properties of an individual.
Correct. In fact, in many ways, they're motivated to violate those three.
Correct.
And it's a difficult subject for most people to understand, because most people think that the government had good intent, so that gives them the right. No, the intent is not what we're worried about. It's the actual results. The best intent can end up taking someone's liberty and freedom and property, and that is wrong. And we all have to believe that that is wrong, and we all have to pursue a lifestyle and a government that does not allow that to happen. Because if one person's life, liberty, freedoms, and property are being violated, then all of our freedoms, liberties, and property are being violated. We can't allow that to happen.
Yeah.
So, and within each country, we are responsible to make sure that we're not allowing that to happen. So while we don't, I have no control as an American citizen. I have no control what happens in, we'll make up a fake country, in Nowheresville, the country of Nowheresville. But I do have the power and the right to work against the stealing of life, the stealing of liberty, freedom, and property here in the United States. And so how does someone like me do that? Number one, first thing I have to do is I have to educate myself.
Absolutely.
I shouldn't expect the state to educate me. The state is corrupt because the state is run by politicians and people who believe that they are more virtuous and they're smarter than we are, and they have the best intent. Not true. We know that.
Mm-hmm. We have seen it.
We have seen it. We're living through it. So I have to first educate myself. Then I have to educate my family and work towards the education of my family. Then I have to work towards educating my peers, which brings me to you.
You have done.
Yes. So you and I probably were interacting for maybe 6 months or so, maybe a little longer, 8 months prior to, and we had many conversations. So instead of me beating you over the head, with a book, we were having a wonderful, we were eating lunch together. We were having a wonderful conversation. And I said, by the way, Manuel, are you familiar with a work of a man by the name of Frederic Bastiat? He wrote this work in the 1850s, and it was during the French Revolutions. And you need to read this, because this is one of the most foundational, influential liberty, freedom, and property documents ever produced. You need to check this out. Provide you the link, and off you go. Again, I can't beat you over the head and force you to do it, but through development of a relationship, a friendship, right, I'm able to then provide some level of influence, because we have great respect for each other. I know that. I have great respect for you, and I know that feeling is mutual. You've exercised that.
Likewise.
Yes. And so then to me, that becomes a moral obligation for me to reach out and say, hey, by the way, there's something you need to read. And then it's up to you to exercise your free will. You've been provided free will by, if you believe in God, it's provided by God. If you believe it's a creator, but that free will is yours to exercise.
Mm-hmm.
You're exercising that free will by going and getting the pamphlet and sitting down and saying, okay, Jim told me I need to read this. I like Jim. Jim's a respected, friend, and I'm gonna check it out. And then you sit down and you start reading it, and you're like, oh my gosh,
yeah,
where's this been? Why don't I know about it?
And I have asked Jim around in my circle, have you guys, did you know about Frederic Bastiat? And, I think 19 out of 20 have say no. And one of the reasons why I'm doing this podcast. So I always think about these, and you tell me, I'm going to give you a thought, and you tell me what you think about it. But if I tax you 100% of what you do, I'm attempting to those three things. I'm taking your property.
Yes.
Because you work for it. You're not free anymore. Now you're a slave, aren't you? If I tax you 100%, right? You're working for nothing, so you're not free. You need to do what I say. And then I'm taking part of your life as well.
Yes.
Because you have limited time, and time is life. So what is the number when that ceases? Is it 50? Is it 30? Because I have heard politicians saying we need to tax billionaires 90%.
Mm-hmm.
Recently.
Mm-hmm.
And not long ago, we were actually taxing people with their life and their property and their freedom. They were slaves.
Absolutely.
So what is that number? I don't have the answer. I know it's not zero. And I'm not proposing zero. Mm-hmm. But I know it's not 100%, and it shouldn't be close to it.
Correct. And in order for the governments and government entities to protect liberty, freedom, and property, it comes in an expense. And we as a society need to know that collectively we need to pay for that expense. You brought up slavery, and interestingly enough, I think that Bastiat has a very good quote on this. He says, when a portion of wealth is transferred from the person who owns it without his or her consent, or without compensation, and whether by force or by fraud, to anyone who does not own it, then I say that property is violated. That is an act of plunder. So he's basically saying the government is taking things they shouldn't be taking. And my parenthetical was, you could also refer to this as a form of slavery.
Correct.
And there are lots of people who believe that here in the United States currently we have a very interesting thing going on where people believe that society should provide free medical care for everyone in society, regardless of any issue. And I agree that medical care is extremely important, and it should be important to society. But if you study the medical industry in the United States, a big reason why the medical industry is so expensive is because of the overreaching hand of the government. It's not because it's expensive, because that's just the cost, and it's expensive because the government is deeply buried into our medical system, and they control a massive portion of our medical industry already. So they have control over all the cost mechanisms.
So the regulations or
regulations, pricing structures that they're willing to pay doctors. There's a really good example in the U.S. of a non-regulated medical sector that the costs have gone down precipitously.
So you think if and I've seen this before, every time you try to regulate or control a market, mm-hmm. it goes mayhem.
Yes.
It completely transform it into a monster.
Yes.
So the more you're hands off, and a lot of people, they don't get this. They get no. Capitalism is evil, and the market is a monster of 7 heads that will eat you.
Yes.
And I'm like, why you say that? Look, the market is millions of people making decisions every day for their own benefit as individuals to protect their life, their freedom, and their property.
Absolutely.
Isn't that what the market is?
That is what it is.
Don't you think it's a very powerful and wise thing?
Yes.
And your interests are not my interest.
Correct.
But nevertheless, the market allows for both of us to actually profit, and that's not a bad word.
No.
From it.
Yes.
So,
interestingly enough, yours and I's interest may not be the same at this moment because I'm older. My kids are now moved on and have their own lives. You're still raising kids at this time, right?
Correct.
So your interests are focused in that area. When my kids were young and I wanted to send them to certain schools, I drove a car and made sure I put 350,000 miles on it before I got a different car. My interests today are slightly different. I'm still thrifty, or some people would say frugal, but I want to get the best value I can. But when you're raising kids and you're trying to educate your kids a certain way, and maybe that requires you to send them to a private school, you're deferring other forms of spending in order to be able to afford that. And I lived through that, and that's fine. So each of our interests, they come and go. It's kind of like an ebb and flow of the tide, right? Depending on what part of your life you may have certain interest. As I get older now, even some of my investment strategies I'm saying, well, I need to move into more secure type investments, so I get maybe a lower rate of return, but it's more guaranteed, because as I get older, I want to put less of my investments at risk. And we go through those cycles. But when it comes to our liberty, freedom, and property, we should have a constant. And you brought up education earlier, and I wanted to just go back to that really quickly. The education of our young people today is so heavily impacted by what the state does. The state is controlling what history is actually in the textbooks.
Cheers.
Cheers. Which means that if they want to do revisionist history, where they're going back and changing long established history, they can do that, and they can change it in a textbook, and within a generation or two, the history that we grew up with, or I grew up with, is now different than, say, a young man of 12 to 15 years of age today would be learning, because someone has revised the history. Doesn't make what they're learning today right, but there's so much political influence into each of these different aspects of education. So the political views of teachers is more upfront and apparent to students than it was during my generation. During my generation, I had no idea what my school teachers' political views were, because they didn't delve off into that. But today, school teachers, and we see it on a daily basis. You can watch YouTube videos. We were talking about that earlier. You can see YouTube videos. You can see newscasts where teachers are lecturing young people in the classroom on different political views.
I have seen teachers, sorry, Jim, but I have seen teachers tweet,
yes,
tomorrow my class has a test. If they say something nice about Trump, I will fail them.
Yes.
Like, my jaw drops. I'm just like, what?
Yes.
You can't do that.
No.
And it's happening. So to throw, I think the expression in English is throw a spanner. Something like, in this conversation is, if you're receiving education free, which is not,
yes,
from the government, isn't that why we never read Bastiat?
Absolutely.
Because imagine teaching everybody a critical mass, these concepts. Imagine the power of giving to the individual. You're not. What I see is different. What I see is that is actually an attempt to make you a tribal, to make you part of a tribe, more than to make you a strong individual.
Yes.
In a way.
Yes.
So, and and the amount of work required to be a good individual, a good citizen, it's staggering. It doesn't happen in one day. So not a lot of people reach that. It's easier to be part of the tribe.
It is.
It's so much easier. The amount of energy required to be part of the tribe. You just wear the cap, put the colors, and recite the songs or the anthem.
Yes, the mantra.
Yes.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's it. You're part of the tribe. Mm-hmm. To be an individual, you have to study, you have to read, you have to fall, you have to learn from your mistakes, and understand that you can't blame anybody but yourself, and to understand something that is, I think for me, very liberating, is that nobody owes you shit.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
No, you are entitled of nothing.
Yes.
It's like, well, I'm a human being. I have rights. Yeah, you have rights to be alive.
Yes.
You have rights to be free.
Yes.
And to accumulate property. Welcome to the world.
Yes. Only property that you actually rightfully and morally work for.
Correct. So when I see people in government saying, I'm going to pass a law to tax 90% of the billionaires because inequality is immoral, who are you? Based on what?
Yes.
Who gave you this power? The guys who vote for you?
Yes.
No.
And what's interesting is that they have society, the rest of society, believing all the way down to young people who are in, kindergarten, first, second, third grade. They have them already believing at that age that if they tax the billionaires at that level, that it's only taking money from the billionaires. But what they fail to educate the young people on is, if the taxes for the billionaires goes to 90%, then the taxes for millionaires is going to go to 75%. That means the taxes for people who make 100,000 are going to go to 60%, and people who make 50,000 are going to go to 40 or 50%. There'll be a massive taking of wealth and property, and doing it at the point of the gun, basically, or with the threat of imprisonment.
Absolutely.
They will force you to do this. And so I'll go back to another Bastiat quote real quick, unless you want to read it. You like this one, the fourth one.
Go ahead, you read it.
Okay.
You have better English than me.
Socialism, like the ancient ideas from which it springs, confuses the distinction between government and society. As a result of this, every time we object to a thing being done by government, the socialists conclude that we object to its being done at all. We disapprove of state education, then the socialists say that we are opposed to any education. We object to a state religion, then the socialists say that we want no religion at all. We object to state-enforced equality, then they say that we are against equality, and so on and so on. It is as if the socialists were to accuse us of not wanting persons to eat because we do not want the state to raise grain. I mean, it's just a profound statement what he's making here.
In 1850.
In 1850. And interestingly enough, he's talking about equality here, and we have a wealth equality movement here in the United States where they want to equalize wealth across the board. We have all of these equality movements, and unless the equality is being done by the free market or by society in an organic way, it will never work. When it's government forced, it will always fail.
As if equality was the problem. I've never seen anybody die of inequality.
Correct. Yes.
I mean, you die of poverty. You can starve, and you can have diseases, and you can, freeze to death because you don't have a roof. I mean, it's horrible being, poor.
Yes.
But you don't die because somebody else is rich. Yes. That's not true. That aberration.
Yes.
It's been inflicted more and more, and you hear it.
Yeah, and
today in this country, which I love, by the way.
Yeah. And we love having you.
Yeah.
I mean that sincerely.
Thank you.
You're just, it's amazing that we get the quality of individuals like yourself who want to immigrate here and come live here.
Thank you. I mean, the fact that this is I think one of the few places in the world where these three things are still very important to a critical mass, right? But I see certain people trying to take this away, and they're running for president.
Yes. What's interesting to me about that is they advertise it in a very big way, that we want to take your liberties, freedoms, and property, and we want to do it in this way. But the intent is that we'll take that and then we'll use the money for something else, and you'll be better off. And they have, right now they're advertising, because we're in an election year, they're advertising some very grandiose ideas that, well, this is going to be good for society. So we need to be taxing certain sectors of society, people who make certain amounts of money at these very high rates. It has to happen. The interesting thing to me about that is that what has happened traditionally in our society is those grandiose ideas have not come to fruition. But on the backside of it, what comes is incrementalism. And so while they don't get the 40% increase in taxation, they might get a 6 or an 8 or a 10% increase in taxation. Then the next time we have a big election, especially presidential or election for senators or something like that, then they go and grab another 4 or 6 or 8%. So pretty soon, incrementally, they achieve their goals, but they're doing it across generations, and they're taking a little bit at a time. And that's why it's so important for us to be on guard at all times, because incrementalism, it's easy to see how incrementalism can take from you what is rightfully yours, and you may not even notice it. Maybe you're too busy. Maybe you do work in a job where you're not making a lot of money and you have to work 2 jobs. And so your days are consumed with working 16 hours a day, 2 jobs, trying to provide for your family. I understand that. I've actually been at a part of my life where I was very young and I had to work a lot of extra hours to make ends meet. But that doesn't give the government the right to do these things. So as a society, we need to be educating ourselves, educating our families, educating our peers, or at least opening our peers' minds to these ideas to make sure that we're not allowing the government to incrementally steal from us what is rightfully ours just because we are alive.
Correct. On the socialism part, I think I feel obliged to, and this podcast is in English, and I hope some English-speaking people and some Americans, friend of yours, hear this. And I can tell you, socialism has been in my country for a long time. Not for 20 years. Chavez was not the first socialist.
Yes.
We had socialists before him. And the way I describe it is like a slippery slope that you don't know when start killing people. Initially, a very mild socialist is benign, but eventually turns into this catastrophe, into this horrible dystopian 1984 George Orwellian world. And if you don't believe me, buy a ticket and land in Caracas and just stay there for a few weeks and see what it is. Chavez sold as a biggest threat to everybody inequality. That's what it says. Inequality is horrible. Being rich is bad. If you're rich, you should be ashamed of yourself. That's what he sold.
Yes.
And people bought it.
Yes. What's interesting to me about people when they talk about wealth, politicians will preach to the people in the lowest rungs of current income earners that the people who are making more are getting further and further ahead of them. And so we have to stop them and pull them down in order for people at the lowest end of the spectrum to come up. They promote an idea that there's only one economic pie.
Correct.
And if somebody takes 10% of the pie or 12% or 14%, then that's just more of the pie that other people can't take.
It's just one pie.
Right. The Austrian education system in economics believes that the number of pies is infinite.
Correct.
And we can expand that number infinitely. And
Just make your pie.
correct. Make your own pie. Or you know, back to my father, I was very blessed when I was a young man. My father worked in the oil industry, and then later on went and worked in an oil industry related to the oil industries, but it also crossed over into agriculture, and he was representing a company who sold steel, forgings, pipe, I-beams, whatever you may have, welding supplies. And so he dealt with a lot of people who worked in agriculture, a lot of very large landowners in California. And I was a young man, I was in my teens, and my father would have me go sometimes in the evening or on the weekends. If the delivery teams for the company he worked for couldn't make a delivery, my father, who was quite versatile and did a lot of different jobs in his lifetime, he could actually operate a large semi truck. So he would say, "No problem, son, you're going with me, and we're going to make the delivery. It's loaded on the trailer already. All we got to do is hook up and go and do it." So we would go do that, and my father he would say, on our way there, "The person we're going to meet is so-and-so. He's the man who owns this land. He started off with X, maybe an acre, and now he owns 1,500 acres. He has 150 people working for him because he grows almonds or walnuts or nectarines or whatever it may be. You need to pay attention when we're there, because you can learn a lot just being around this man." At that time in our society, most people, my father's generation in particular, they looked to successful people and said, "What can I learn from that successful
Correct.
people?" Today we're teaching our young people, don't look at successful people and ask yourself, what can you learn from this successful people? What we're doing is we're teaching our young people to say, well, they're successful and they have all this stuff, and I want what they have, and they should have to give it to me just because I need it, and I shouldn't have to work for it. And
I'm a human being.
correct.
Yeah.
Right. I exist, so I deserve these
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
Whereas Bastiat in his pamphlet, he's saying, no, the only three things you get are liberty, freedom, and property. There is no right to someone else's property. So when I read the quote earlier about, well, this is just slavery, because when you're taking from someone else who has worked for something and earned it, you're taking from them without any payment, without any recourse, then you are basically enslaving them, especially if you're doing it over a period of time and forcing them to do it repeatedly. And it's such a dangerous thing we do, whereas if we were teaching our young people today and young people around the world to ask yourself, who are the successful people you know? And success, I'm not talking about just monetary success. I'm talking about people who have potentially been a school bus driver. Mm-hmm. There's a great story about a school bus driver here in the United States he drove a school bus for 35 years. And when he retired with almost $2 million.
Wow.
Now, how did he do that? He worked hard.
Absolutely.
He worked every overtime shift he could. He drove other buses in his time off. He saved his money. He invested his money in certain investments that would earn him a rate of return, and he didn't plunder the money. He didn't waste it. And that's
probably study how to invest it.
Right. And
put time on it.
Right. And I think in that particular story, and I'll try and get that story for you where I've read that, in that particular story, and it's a true story, I don't think in any 1 year he made more than $50,000. And he raised a family of 2 kids and his wife, and he took care of them. They had their own home. And you have to ask yourself, well, today if someone was making $50,000 in the United States, they'd be like, well, there's no way I'll ever accumulate wealth like that. Mm-hmm. But you have to start somewhere, and you have to be looking for opportunities. Here's this man driving a bus, and he's telling the people who own the bus company that he's working for, if there are overtime shifts, if you need somebody to drive on the weekend, you need somebody to, do an extra trip.
But that's hard.
I'm your guy.
I'm gonna be the devil's advocate here, Jim. That's hard work.
Yes.
That's a lifetime.
Yes.
Oh, I don't want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I want the government to give me my pie, or my piece of the pie.
Yes.
That's what we hear.
That is.
That is very scary.
Yes.
I'm telling you, I've seen what it does. I lost my country to
Yes.
these people, and all they want is power. All they want is be there forever. Because selling that is so easy.
Yes.
It sell itself to people that haven't put the time to actually understand these concepts, and it takes hard work. That's why I like sports so much,
Yes.
because to master a sport, you have to work your tail off, right?
Yes.
You cannot be LeBron James tomorrow. The government can't give you that.
Correct.
I loved sports for that.
Yes.
Because man, that guy has worked his entire life to be what he is. You want to be like him? You better start now.
Yes. And for people who have played sports at any, significant level, know that the people who are successful in sports is not always the people who are most talented. It's the people who have some level of talent, but also apply it the best and work the hardest and hone their craft.
Or you think Michael Jackson didn't work? Michael Jordan,
Yes.
either Michael Jackson too. He was singing since he was a kid. But Michael Jordan worked his tail off.
Oh, yes.
To be for me, one of the best basketball players. All those guys in the NBA,
Mm-hmm.
they were faced by fierce competition. I have seen how that is in this country.
Yes.
You want to be a basketball player, you want to be a professional athlete, you need to put 2, 3, 4 hours, maybe more every day. It's not, nobody will install that software from you.
Correct.
Government will not give you a handout.
Yes.
Oh, I'm going to give you free athleticism.
Yes.
And yet again, some people say, oh, I don't like sports because it creates a hierarchy. Yeah, the hierarchy is a natural part of everything.
Absolutely.
Every time you have a group of individuals, you have multiple hierarchies, and you can subdivide that in, you will have the best boxer, you will have the guys with a higher IQ, you will have the tallest, you will have the smallest, you will have the strongest. So how you want to control the society?
Yes.
How you want to subdivide it? That's a trap. It's a trap from Star Wars.
Yes.
It's a trap.
Interestingly,
Don't fall into it.
Yes. Interestingly enough, the renowned psychologist Dr. Jordan Peterson.
Correct.
He discusses hierarchies, and he relates our hierarchical nature to the lobster, and our hierarchical nature actually comes from, or is akin to the same hierarchical nature that the lobster has, and the lobster has had this for a couple of 100 million years.
Oh yeah.
So it's very interesting that it's an innate part of who we are, but yet society, and in particular the government, tries to fight against that.
Correct.
And tries to equalize things. I'll read another quick Bastiat
Yes,
one,
please.
because this is a.
And thanks for doing this, by the way. This is great.
Yeah. So, and we'll have these. I'm assuming I'm gonna provide you this.
Yeah, we're gonna put it
electronically,
in the comments area of this podcast, so you can read. You can read again what Jim is reading. I think it's great.
Yeah, and we'll also provide the link to a free copy of the law.
Yeah.
If you want to buy a printed book form of it, it is available in most bookstores or Amazon or wherever. So at it says, if the natural tendencies of mankind are so bad that it is not safe to permit people to be free, how is it that the tendencies of these organizers, he's speaking about politicians here, are always good? Do not the legislators and their appointed agents also belong to the human race? Or do they believe that they themselves are made of a finer clay than the rest of mankind? And in the United States, one of the interesting concepts that people have is that, you know, congressmen, even at the state level, you have your local representatives, your local congressmen, then you have your people who are in the Senate of your state. You have a governor. All of these people are elected officials. We have all selected them to be elected officials, and they are charged with running the government to the benefit of the people. But the only thing we're wanting them to do is to protect liberty, freedom, and property. We're not wanting them to socially engineer society. Society will do that themselves. And we were talking about wealth and working a job. I've been very blessed in the last, say, 30 years in my career to make a very good living. I've exchanged my skills, knowledge, education, and abilities for a payment from the companies that I've worked for. So in looking back on this, you know, I was watching a program about a senator. I won't mention whether he's Democrat or Republican. He entered the United States Senate about the time my career was really starting to pick up. And that year, he and I made the same amount of money. I made the same amount of money as a U.S. senator. And I was like, wow, I'm really starting to feel like I'm getting to where I've been wanting to work.
It's
towards.
paying off, finally.
It's paying off. My hard work and my dedication, my
knowledge.
Yeah. This is, you know, I'm able to put my property, I'm able to put it to work and exchange it for this salary.
And add value and make
Right.
more pies.
Yes, and make more pies and provide my family health care, provide my family a roof, provide my family transportation, sustenance in the forms of food. And that senator recently retired. And I read where he had entered the Senate worth less than $40,000 in that year, 30 years ago. He retired 2 years ago, and he left the Senate worth in excess of $30 million. Now, how does that happen? Because I've been working, and every year I've been making as much or a little more than a U.S. senator, but I have not been able to accumulate $30 million, and I try and be as diligent with saving our money as I can. I believe these opportunities are truly a gift from God, and I'm truly being blessed, and I'm trying to be as charitable as possible, trying to be as serving as I can within my family and within my community. But how does that happen? The way it happens is it goes back to the quote I just read, where do these legislators and their appointed agents, they also belong to the human race, which means they're fallible just like we are.
Yeah.
And absolute power corrupts. Absolutely. Yeah. So this is what happens when we give people this level of power. They will become corrupt, and they will do things that work against us as individuals and free citizens.
Imagine how, and by the way, Bastiat wrote this thing while he was dying.
Yes, he did.
I think it's important to say that. And probably that's important because I don't know if he knew that he was dying, but to have tuberculosis in 1849 was a bad thing to have.
Absolutely.
Right? And I think he knew, and probably that he was so blunt, right? But this is already happening in 1850, and we know this happens again and again. Guys get into power, and now they're like Marvel heroes, like from the DC universe or whatever. Like they're larger than life, and what the heck? I mean, it's like whatever they say is gospel. The political class of the world is in a state of, I don't know. I think they're deranged completely. I don't know what you think. I mean,
yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to read one more quote, and then I'm going to go on and speak to that. Bastiat in 1850 wrote, "Legal plunder has two roots. One of them, as I have said before, is human greed. The other is in false philanthropy. making people believe you're trying to do good for people and giving away things for free, but you're actually not doing that. You're doing it to the betterment of yourself. Correct. Or your peer group, or a select group of people, creating some level of a bourgeoisie, a group of people who are politically connected. The thing with our kids is that we have a group of young people today who are, we see in poll after poll after poll, there's a rise in the belief that socialism is good. And
Absolutely.
the social construct is good.
It scares the bejesus out of me.
It does myself as well, because just a little bit of, a little bit, it doesn't take a lot, but if you do a little bit of study of the 20th century and study what Stalin and Mao and Hitler and Pol Pot and people like that did, they wiped out 100 plus million souls off the face of the earth. They murdered them.
I like the fact that you included Hitler there.
Yes. Well, he was a socialist.
Absolutely.
Yes. And the way they did this, and the way they got their societies turned to this, was through political manipulation. Yeah. And making people believe what they did was good. And when people wouldn't believe what they did was good, they, at the point of a gun, they forced them to believe it. And if they didn't do it then, they murdered them. And I think there's a lot of naivete in the belief that, well, people will do good if we just let them do good. Society will do good if we let society do good, because society will self-police. We don't need the government to police these things. The free market will take care of that. So if the vast majority of people in the United States today, and I've been very blessed to travel to many, many foreign countries through my employment, and through pleasure traveling with my wife. And I do want to say my wife is not from the United States. My wife immigrated here. And my wife, I asked her what it was like, her first trip to the United States. And she said, when the door of the plane opened, the opportunity was palatable. That's the word she used, but she used it in her native tongue, and I translated it. She could taste the opportunity. She could see the opportunity. And she knew that she could be successful here. Whereas in the country where she grew up, there was impediments to being successful. It was more based on who you know and levels of corruption and being able to weave your way through this very corrupt labyrinth of connectivity, and again, the political class, and being connected to the right people and doing certain favors for people in order to get favor. She came here and she said, well, there was none of that, and I knew I could be successful, which is just an amazing thing. And if we could teach our kids that, wouldn't that be truly amazing?
Unbelievable. I'm telling you, I felt the same way when I arrived to Australia. I was 30 years old, and I was fortunate to have certain skills which in that country were valuable. And that's what they value. They value the fact that I knew. They value what I was able to provide, not who I was or how I looked or my accent. They didn't care about my accent. Yeah. They cared, the majority of them, about what was able to add, and I was respected in that sense. And in this other, in fact, in my country, and it's hard to tell it, it feels bad saying it, but it's true. It's more about, like your wife is saying, it was like, well, my value was within my social circle, and it was fortunate enough to know somebody with certain connections, and I was going to do this, and that gives you a path completely different.
Yes.
From the fact that you can actually work hard and install certain software in your brain, right? Certain application that can be actually now trade in the entire planet.
Yes.
Very different.
Yes. And you've been able to trade it across the planet.
I have.
Yes.
I have been fortunate enough. And again, I tell everybody, nobody gave me that.
Correct.
No government gave me as an app. Oh, install that for free. Become an engineer. That's the fallacy.
Yes.
When they're going to give you something for free, it's not free.
Correct.
You are giving away something. Be very careful about what you're giving away.
You could be giving away your liberty, freedom, or property.
And the problem is, Jim, that people, how you measure that. People doesn't know how to measure that. I'll give a little bit of freedom away. It's easier, right? I can trade freedom.
Mm-hmm.
I can trade it. There's no way to interchange that. So it's like, it's just a word for some people, right? There's no value there. But man, when you lose it, it's called tyranny.
Yes.
And you're told what to do and you have no way. It's a nightmare.
Yes. Your country has many stories of people who said, I have nothing to hide from the government, so I'll invite the government to come in and inspect my home, come in and look for what it is they're looking for because I have nothing to hide. Some people like that, people don't know where they are anymore because those people were taken away.
Yeah.
Because while they may not have found what they were looking for, maybe they found something they didn't like and they took them away.
Oh, for sure.
They imprisoned them, or they had them murdered, or they worked to remove them from society. And I'm not saying that all people who work for the government are evil, by no means. The institutions of government and the motivations are only evil if the people who are within those and commanding those structures and those institutions are evil themselves. And a good example of this is in California. There was a congressman in California who was very vocal against gun rights in the state of California and restricting guns in the state of California. He is currently serving a sentence in prison for being a gun runner. So what he was doing was he was working the state laws, and he had a lot of influence. He was a very influential congressman. He had a lot of influence. He was working the state laws to prevent certain types of guns from being available for sale in the United States and in California in particular. Then he was importing illegally that same kind of gun.
So he was creating a market for himself.
He was creating a market for himself.
There you go.
So while the government wasn't the evil entity, it was the person who was representing the government who had the evil intentions.
And what do you think has happened to everything in my country?
Yes.
That happened. Now multiply that by 10,000
Yes.
or 100,000. Multiply that with everything you can imagine. Not only guns, people, food, recreation, anything, steel, aluminum, gold, you name it, everything, shops, whatever, services, I'll take it from you. I make it so scarce that now the price is impossible, and I run the show.
Yes, you make all the rules.
Yeah, I make the rules. I rig the market. That's not free market.
Correct.
That's not free market.
Yes.
And that's why everything in Venezuela right now is completely crazy. The economy in Venezuela is crazy. Right?
Yes.
You want to buy something there and it's 3 times what it costs here. But yet again, you make, the minimum wage in Venezuela is $3 a month.
Yes.
Okay? But if you want to buy chicken, it will cost you 3 times what it costs here in Houston.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell me, how's that possible?
So just basic subsistence living is extremely
I don't even know how they do it anymore.
Yes.
It's basically they're a slave of the government.
Yes.
That's what they are. They have given away their freedom and almost all their property. So the government remains empowered.
Yes.
That's what it is. And by doing that, they're giving their life away.
Yes.
Never seen before, Jim. In my country, we were number one in partying.
Yes.
And being happy. What was not to be happy about? We have a beautiful place. We're being blessed, right, by this planet to give you a very nice part of the world.
Yes. It's
it's beautiful weather. Our women are gorgeous, was not. And on top of that, we have the biggest reserve of oil in the world.
And interestingly enough, a tremendous melting pot of people from all over the world
Yeah.
who created that society.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's not just one. It's not an ex United Kingdom colony. It's not an ex Portuguese colony. It's not an ex. There are peoples from all over the world immigrated to Venezuela
Yeah.
for different reasons, and the society is built upon that melting pot.
Absolutely.
And
which is similar to what happened here.
yes,
What has been happening here.
Yes.
The only difference is our initial, the roots are Spain and not
Yes.
England, but and that creates huge differences, by the way, which I don't think we should touch here because it will take forever. But and now all that has disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
It's basically a government that has taken away your freedom and your property, which in reality is your life, and is controlling everything. And I'm telling you, initially looks very benign, because when you don't have money to pay education, and somebody's telling you they're going to give it to you for free, what do you do?
Yes.
Well, I'll take it. Thank you.
Absolutely.
But it's not free. That's the trap right there.
Yes.
It's not free. You're paying somehow. Believe me, you're paying somehow.
Absolutely. So this brings us to another one of Bastiat's, a quote from Bastiat's The Law. But what do the socialists do? They cleverly disguise this legal plunder from others, and even from themselves, under the seductive names of fraternity, unity, equality, organization, and association.
Does it sound familiar?
Yes. Because we ask so little from the law, only justice, the socialists thereby assume that we reject fraternity, unity, organization, and association. And today in the United States, we say things like, well, there's an unwritten, this is my own parenthetical and my own commentary on that. Today we use terms like, there's an unwritten social contract that we are to allow the government to confiscate at the point of the gun all we had worked for, and then redistribute it how they see it.
Taxes.
Taxes.
Yeah.
And I'm going to I'm going to bring up a consumer product in the United States. So in the United States, and I know we're probably, most people in the United States aren't going to watch this, but in the United States, and the federal government will provide a person a very lucrative tax credit if they buy an electric vehicle. So let's use the Tesla D model, for instance. So if you go buy a Tesla D model, you're spending over $100,000 to buy the car. The government, for whatever reason, allowed themselves to be lobbied on behalf of Tesla and electric car associations to be able to provide people a very lucrative tax credit to get back some of their investment. That's picking winners and losers. I don't get a tax credit for buying a GMC or a Ford. So why are we doing that? And we're by doing that, we are saying that certain technologies need to win over other technologies.
It goes to the environment.
Yes,
The environment.
that's
debate.
what people believe.
Yeah.
But anyone who's ever seen a lithium mine versus an oil well location, anyone who's some of the things that I don't think we've actually completely expanded is our knowledge on how we're going to dispose of all these lithium batteries. They have to be disposed of at some point in time. There is a tremendous toxic waste that is created here, and we haven't dealt with that because the technology is young enough, and we're producing lithium batteries in such a small amount. We're dealing with that now, but when it's in every car on every road, and you're turning those cars over every 4, 6, or 8 years, the stockpiles of these things are going to be enormous.
We don't know what we don't know yet.
Correct. Yes. And you know, when you and I have at some of our lunch meetings, we've discussed that many times. You know, you don't know what you don't know, so be careful what you delve off into. Try and manage those risks. Try and understand what the future may bring. The laws of unintended consequences can reach up and bite you. And this goes back to what you were talking about the government sells these things, and as people we think, well, I'm getting free education, yeah, I'm going to take it, but you're signing up for a slave-like existence.
Absolutely.
And we have to be very, very
And now
careful.
they're going to give it to you for free, but make no mistakes, they're going to tell you what to study.
Yes.
They're going to tell you where you're going to work. They're going to tell you how much you're going to earn.
Yes.
And if you don't comply, they will take things from you because now you owe them.
Yes.
Make no mistake about that. And I see that you absolutely right. Every time government influences the market somehow, it makes a mayhem of it.
Yes.
It makes a complete disaster. I'm not an anarchist. I think things should be regulated to certain standards. I don't think. I think the government should be like a referee. That's what they need to be. When somebody it's going against these universal laws, then they should act.
What's
I can't kill you.
right?
I shouldn't. And if I do, I should be punished or I should pay with my life.
Yes.
That's what the government is there for, right?
Yes.
To safeguard the individuals.
That and only that.
Yeah. And I remember and when I was younger, our governments were owners of hotels, were owners of airlines, you name it. And I'm like, and all those things were not good.
No.
Not good. All they do is a vortex of corruption, basically.
Yes.
That's what they produce.
Yes. What's interesting about the free market and people not believing the free market can work without government influencing the free market is if you own a business and you're doing business with other businesses and someone writes a poor review, how impactful is that? It can be quite impactful.
Yeah.
And most business owners would tell you, "Oh yeah, I'm making sure I'm bending over backwards to provide the best customer service I can."
Absolutely.
And be the best service provider if you're providing a service, or product provider or if you're providing a product. I'm doing the absolute best that I can do in order to satisfy the customer. Because the word of mouth and the power of a poor review can have substantial impact on a person's business. But yet, and most people know that. Most people absolutely know that. I mean, a couple of the most powerful applications we have on smartphones today are things like Yelp and things like that, right? These can be very powerful. Most of your online shopping sites have very extensive review systems, and they're being policed and not for necessarily whether it's a good review or bad review, but to make sure that people aren't putting in false reviews. And that's the power of the free market. But yet, if you told people we were going to get rid of certain regulations, they would freak out because they would say, well, you can't do that because we need the government to regulate this. We just can't have the free market taking care of this. Why can't we?
I don't know. It's just they feel naked. I mean, it's a lot of people in trying to make finish my map. I don't think I will never finish making that map in my head. I can't understand right now, and I question this to anybody, and you guys can comment. Why people think that government can actually distribute, organize, and influence better than millions of people? Why a bunch of bureaucrats hungry for power can do that better than millions of people out there?
Yes.
Okay. And you can tell me that people will abuse the free market. Yes, we have seen it. That's what the government should stop. Because they are attempting against your freedom, against your life, and against your property, back again to the same thing.
Yes.
isn't it's so powerful.
It is.
It's so powerful, so simple. At the same time, it takes so much to understand. And I'm gonna give it away, but it took me a while to understand the Second Amendment.
Yes.
It's not an easy concept.
No, it is not. And most people who come from places in the world that don't have that freedom, that don't have that liberty, reject it because they don't understand it.
It has created unintended consequences, though.
Yes, it has. Absolutely. So,
but it's a difficult one to. I mean, a lot of people says that is crazy that USA has that law where you can bear your God-given right to bear arms.
Yes.
And they're there to safeguard your liberty,
correct,
your freedom,
correct,
and your property and your life.
Right.
That's from government.
Correct. Mainly from the government, but it could be from others.
Yeah. So that is super powerful. But yeah, people abuse that.
Yes.
And people make horrible things, and we have seen it. I'm at the beginning when I got here 6 years ago, I said, oh, man, this is just crazy because I come from another country which is the opposite. You okay there, Diego? Yeah. And Australia is actually the opposite.
Yes.
They took away all the guns.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and this problem does not happen there, but there are just a little portion of this country.
Yes.
I think they were able to actually collect all the guns.
Yes.
I don't think you can do that here.
No.
Not anymore.
Yes. Also, and the Second Amendment seems to be quite controversial, and for people some people may not know, the Second Amendment in the United States, it guarantees the right of citizens to own and bear firearms without infringement by the government. It is the Second Amendment, and most historians would say that it was placed second after the First Amendment, which is the freedom of speech, the right to assembly, to gather together. Mm-hmm. So a lot of people believe that the Second Amendment was placed there in order to protect the First Amendment.
Correct.
Freedom of speech, freedom of the right to assemble as groups within a free society, those are extremely important rights.
Absolutely.
If your speech is controlled, if your right to go certain places and associate with certain people, to come here and sit with you in your wonderful studio and do this podcast, if that was restricted by the government, life would be very different here.
Do you imagine me having to pay a license to say what I want to say?
No, I can't.
Do you imagine that?
No, I cannot imagine.
Well, that happened in my country.
Yes, I know that. I'm quite aware.
If I do this there, I will probably be having some sort of special forces with masks knocking on my door.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the thing when people come here, I think a lot of people think that there are other countries that have the same level of freedom that we have here. But there's no other country in the world that has the levels of freedom and liberty that the United States affords.
It's amazing for me, and that's why I've come to like this country so much. The way this government was organized from the beginning, and it was interesting. Last night I was actually understanding when Bastiat wrote the law and when the Constitution was written. There's quite a difference in there.
Yes.
It's like 75 years, something like that.
Yes.
So, these guys who wrote, I think they're aliens, or I don't know who they are, but they were extremely clever people. When you write a document that stands the time of 229 years and still stand and still works,
and is challenged on a regular basis.
it's challenging, and you know how many times we have changed our constitution in our country.
Yes.
Every time we have a freaking president,
Yes.
they change the freaking constitution. Yeah, it's a joke. But this one is like it's the same with these. How you make holes. You know what I've seen in the internet about Bastiat? They're saying they attack him as a person.
Yes. Absolutely.
Because they cannot attack
The logic.
the logic.
Correct.
They can't.
Yeah. The natural.
It's so sound.
Yes.
It's the same with the Constitution.
Yes. His view on that, and I'll read another quote here. Life, faculties, he's speaking about production, in other words, individuality, liberty, property, this is man. So this is mankind. And in spite of the cunning and artful political leaders, these three gifts from God precede all human legislation and are superior to it. He wrote this in 1850. And, there's a saying about having the benefit of the foresight and the ability for others who have gone before us, who have done amazing things, and we are the beneficiaries of that now. There's a saying about standing on the shoulders of giants. Mm-hmm. With Bastiat, we are standing on the shoulder of a giant.
Absolutely.
He put this together, and we can read this and we can say, wow, I get what he's saying, and I need to continue to further educate myself, continue to further activate myself. And I'm not describing going out and getting a sign and standing on a street corner, but you can do that if that's what you want. but even so much as to having meaningful conversations with your siblings, your children, your social circles, and exposing people to these ideas, even if they don't necessarily adopt them, you can at least expose them to them. And the more people we can expose to liberty, freedom, and property, and what that actually means, the better off we as a society worldwide will be. And there's a thought process that potentially one person cannot change the world.
Yeah, no.
But that's not true. Most people today who use Facebook will have more than 100 people that they're friended to.
Mm-hmm.
So if that one person can influence 10 of the people that they're connected to, then those 10 people go out and do 10 people. And then those, right, now we're at 100, then you get to 1,000, then you get to 10,000, 100,000, a million. It doesn't take very many levels of separation till we are impacting massive numbers of people. And people need to be self-governing. They need to be believing that they have these rights, and these rights are inalienable. If you look at different parts of the world, and in particular in parts of Latin America, the natural resource, the abundance of natural resource is and I work in the natural resource business, but it's mind-boggling.
Mm-hmm.
The stark beauty of some of these places is mind-boggling. The richness of the culture of the people, music and food, and just socially, how just rich it is. And yet some of these countries are run by the most worthless little despot dictators. And you wonder, well, how do they do that? So I was working in a part of the world, and I flew into this airport. I'll leave the part of the world nameless, but I flew into the capital country and into the airport, and we flew in, and the plane landed at the airport, and the first thing I noticed was the giant slum built right up to the fences of the airport.
That's typical.
Yes, and on every little shanty shack, and these people are tremendously impoverished, but on every one there was at least one, if not two, satellite dishes.
Yeah, that's typical.
So I asked one of my colleagues who was a countryman of that country, I asked him, so what's the story with the satellite dishes? And he said, well, in the last two presidential elections, the president, if you voted for him and you proved through your voting receipt that you voted for him, he would provide you with a free satellite dish and an LCD TV.
Right there, you gave away your freedom.
Absolutely. And he would win those elections. He won those elections by 92 or 94% to 6. That particular president walked away with the vast majority of the sovereign wealth of that country during his 22 years, 24 years, whatever it was, of being the president. So the people who were voting for him because he was going to give them a little measly little pittance of something, which I understand when you're impoverished, getting something like a satellite dish and an LCD TV and free power to be able to power those things may seem like a lot, but the long-term ramifications of that is you lose your liberty and your freedom. And in that particular country, there was so much corruption, there was so much poverty, and yet when you walked and you went places, most of the major construction was being done by expats from other parts of the world.
Correct.
Because of the corruption that went on. So here these people have sold their souls by saying, I'm going to vote, and I'm going to vote in this manner because I'm going to get these free gifts back to me. And yet what they were giving away was they were giving away the rule of their country, and the people who were ruling their country were bringing in favorable contracts which are favorable to them personally, not to the country, and bringing in expats to do all of the work that could be paying their countrymen good, stable wages, and bringing the quality of life for everyone in the country up. And it's very interesting that people get tricked that way.
It's crazy. It's like when they commission a big project, normally those projects end up costing, I don't know, 3 times what the normal cost is, because they have to pay so many under the table, paperbacks that it's just super inefficient. So, look, this is typical of, and I believe that, just to answer that, why that is happening in Latin America, and we have seen it in Africa too. The way their government is organized, it doesn't have the checks. I really like that from this constitution in this country. It's the check and balances that has embedded on it, and that I think was why it's so brilliant. That you have limited power in all the branches of government, all 3.
Yes,
they check each other, right?
Absolutely.
And they have limited power, so you don't have like a king, you don't have a monarch. You actually have a lot of people trying to supposedly make the country better. But I'm seeing, I don't know how to go back to these. Would you say this is utopian to think like this? Would you say we're being naive? Would you say we're being romantic? I mean,
I think some people would believe that.
Yeah.
What I think is that in order to support the belief that I am a free man, and my freedom, my liberty, and the right to my property does not come from this government, I have to be able to understand something like this.
Correct.
And so I don't find that to be utopian. As you so eloquently said earlier, I'm not an anarchist. I know there is a cost to living in a civil society, but we have to limit the government's reach. So what is the right amount of tax? I think that's something that's highly debatable. The government generally will spend more money to do something that private enterprise can do for people. The belief that if the government's not doing it, no one will do it is the wrong belief. We have, if we go back prior to the growth and explosion of growth in our government, let's say pre-1900, we had parks in the United States, and the parks were arranged by private citizens. They weren't by the government. We had charitable giving, philanthropy, soup kitchens. Most poor people were cared for by other people. There was no government social structure. But at the time of the Depression, that all changed. And why did it work for all of those years prior to that? And why was there such a massive power grab during the Depression? Because there was an opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
That's why. And people were in dire straits. And when people become desperate, they're willing to give up things. And that's why Bastiat's work, to me, is so important. And understanding what he means by the law is so important. And I agree with you. We have to consider, is this utopian?
Mm-hmm.
Is this, is this just a pipe dream? Are we just, are we blowing smoke in the wind here?
Correct.
And I don't believe we are. We met through a chance encounter. The freedom and the free will that's bestowed upon me, and my belief structure says that you and I met for a reason.
True. Yeah, I believe that too.
Yes. So this was not just a chance off the wall meeting. We met, and it's up to you and I to exercise that free will to say, Manuel is somebody I'm going to have a relationship with. We are going to be friends. We are going to exchange ideas. We may not always agree, but we are going to have the open exchange of ideas, and we are going to work to help improve each other
Mm-hmm.
without thinking that something is coming in return. We're doing it because we have an innate desire to want to associate with good people, and we see that what comes from that association with good people is good, and we want to proliferate that good. We want to help others. We want to proliferate that even more. Can I read another one from Bastiat?
Yes, please.
That ties right into that. So,
Yeah.
so Bastiat, he said, and this could be the last one I read if you want. So he said, it's not because of men have made laws that personality, liberty, and property exist. On the contrary, it is because personality, liberty, and property existed beforehand that men make laws. What then is law? As I have said elsewhere, it is the collective organization of individual right to lawful defense. So we as individuals bond together, and we collectively come together, we organize, and we say we're going to do these certain things in defense of our rights.
Individual right.
Correct.
And
yeah, when I said ours, I meant our
yeah,
individual.
this is the first podcast that I do in English.
Yes.
And because I said this was going to be a Spanish-speaking channel, but this was so important for me to talk to you that I said I'm going to do it in English. But I have other podcasts, then they're in Spanish, where I talk about the burden of being an individual.
Yes.
Because when you are an individual, the responsibility upon you is massive.
Yes.
It's. And I've been in many tribes,
Mm-hmm.
okay,
Yeah,
but I haven't been in one. I don't want to be in one. I want to be, and in those tribes, I've never been the guy who applaud everything.
Yes.
I've been the one who questions things.
Absolutely.
I'm a pain in the neck to
Absolutely.
be part of it. I'm the one who's talking to the leader of the tribe and says, why are we doing this?
You and I were having a conversation with another individual a few days ago, and you said to them, do I sound like a lawyer now?
Right.
That was it was so apropos. It was so absolutely perfect for the moment, because you did sound like a lawyer.
Yeah, I did.
But you were questioning, and you were doing it in a meaningful way. And maybe that's another thing we've lost in our society, is that the way to get the best result in working on something is not to walk lockstep in with a whole bunch of like thinkers. It's to bring other people in who don't think like you, who can say,
Absolutely.
are we really doing this the right way? Is this the right thing to do? So that you can, and if you're confident in yourself, then you can say, well, that's a good question. Let me step back and look at this and make sure I'm doing this in the right way. Make sure I'm not being offensive towards another person's rights. Make sure I'm not, and I'm talking about their liberty, their freedom, and their property.
Mm-hmm.
Make sure that I'm doing this for the betterment of my family, my social group, the rest of my wherever I'm living, my town, my city, my state. It's okay to be questioned about those things. And we have to be big enough people to say, yeah, I see that. And I'm willing to take that. And I can handle the question.
Absolutely. It's a big responsibility. I've always been, it's in my nature. You can ask my parents. I started asking questions when I was 13. Why we're doing this? I was a pain in the neck for them. And in my rugby team, in my university, even my bosses today, I question it. Why we're going this way?
Yes.
Tell me. I want to know. I want to understand. So, but I think I don't think it's just to be disruptive.
No.
I think it's for me to understand.
Yes.
You want me to row that way? What are we going?
Yes.
I'm just not going to row to the sound of your drum.
Yes.
I'm not going to fetch every ball. I'm not a, Jack Russell that will never stop. I'm going to bring you the ball and says, if you throw it again, and I have to do that again, let me know why.
Yes.
Otherwise, I won't go.
Yes.
But if you and I agree on the reason and the objective, I can fetch that ball many, many times. I've done it, right? I've done it for 25 years, in this industry, right? So,
yeah.
I don't have that problem, but I need to understand the purpose. So that's why I question both in the political class. I question both sides, the one in power and the one in the opposition. It's like, well, is this a show, or this is just real? You want to go in a different direction? I'm not gonna just applaud. I'm not just gonna fetch your balls. I'm gonna question you as a citizen, as an individual. You want to be good for the society? Enrich yourself as an individual.
Yes.
Install as many software as you can in your brain. Yes. They take time. They take effort. Tears, sweat, blood, you name it. And I believe in that. It may sound utopical, may sound romantic, or but that's what I believe.
Both you and I had commented that we had both worked a substantial part of our adult life prior to encountering the law.
Yeah.
That's a profound statement, that we were doing other things and distracted by other things and focused on other things before we got to a point in our lives where there's more to this. I need to expand my knowledge.
Yeah.
I need to be thinking bigger than I'm currently thinking. And getting young people to think about this at an early age, I think, is very important. And I'm fortunate. I get to spend quite a bit of time with young people, and I was with some university students, and
cool.
They're all quite active socially. Some of them active politically, and some of them are quite liberal in their thinking. Liberal not in the classic sense of the word by restricting government, but liberal in the sense of the government should provide everything.
Progressive
Is what we'd refer to them as. And what's interesting is I said, well, why don't we actually take your university grading system and run it the same way the Internal Revenue Service runs the taxation system? And they said, well, what do you mean? And I said, well, the way the taxation system works is those who go out and produce the most get taxed the most. So if we were to convert that to the grading system, that would mean all of you who are all top performers in your classes, a myriad of subject matters, by the way, some STEM related, science, technology, engineering, and math, some who were more liberal art, ask them. So if we were to do this, what that would mean is all of you top performers, all of you who are getting A's and being allowed to move into different programs and potentially different career paths because you are doing quite well in school, we're going to take away some of your grades, and we're going to give those to the students who only show up one day a week, who
didn't study,
who are smoking pot, 3 times a day and hanging out and going out and partying and flying off to different places for spring break, winter break, every break they're going to some different part of the world to have a 2-week drunk fest. We're going to provide some of those grades to them So your A will come down to a C plus, and their Fs will come up to a C.
C plus. So
Correct.
equality
And
of outcome.
Exactly. We'll make the outcome equal. Well, you can't do that. No, but that's what the government is trying to do through the taxation policy. Now, most people don't realize that in the United States, the top 10% earners pay about 80 or 85% of all taxes paid in the United States.
Yeah.
So
I imagine.
Yes. So people can check that. I encourage everyone to go out and, go online, and there are multiple different groups who report those statistics, and the statistics are readily available for you.
But there are people that are going to say that's not enough.
Correct.
As well.
Right. But if we were using the grading process, then that's how it would work.
Correct.
We could also extend this to grocery stores. So if we extend it to a grocery store, then when I entered the grocery store, I would have a card that identified me that would tell this is how much money he makes. And all the prices of everything I made would be adjusted based on how much I made, not on what the value of those things were. Who would shop at that grocery store? Nobody. They'd go out of business in a day.
Of course.
But yet people, because they don't think it's impacting them, think that it's okay for the broader society to have these rules. And for me, most of my career experiences, and even through education and playing sports and that, when people are invested, when people actually have to invest in something and they're putting forth either labor, knowledge, skills, something, they're putting forth something, it could be something as tangible as a monetary investment. When they're doing that, they are much more motivated.
Absolutely.
In the United States today, only about 40% of the people who have the right to vote in a national election for president will vote. 40%.
Very low.
Very low. And I like to say, and I changed my thinking some 20 years ago, we don't just have the right to vote, we have the absolute obligation to educate ourselves as a voter and to vote, to exercise that.
But that takes time.
That takes time, takes
Effort.
And you have to be able to pull away from other things that you may be wanting to do. And so that's,
It's a conundrum.
It is.
It's all these, and just to be closing now, all these concepts are deep. They take time.
Yes.
They're like playing sport. You want to become good at them. You're gonna have to spend some time and dedicate intellect and think deep about them.
Can I go back to something that I said, because I want to make sure I'm clear on this. So as I was saying, in sport, it's not always the person who succeeds who's the most talented. It's the person who generally has some level of talent but works very hard.
Absolutely.
And I would say this pamphlet that Bastiat produced for us, and I thank God that he did, and I'm so blessed to have come across it and to have studied it. I'm not the sharpest tool in the shed, but through hard work and taking time to read this and reading it over and over, even in preparation for our meeting tonight and doing the podcast, I said, well, it's a good time to go back and re-review. And as I was reviewing it, I was like, well, I want to be able to quote these things specifically because it's so important what he said. So I'm going to take notes. And so I started taking notes. And that just shows you that if you work hard, you can attain a level of knowledge. You don't have to be the smartest person in the world. No. You don't have to be the most talented. Through hard work, that's why meritocracy works so well. Yeah. That's why sports is a meritocracy. It's not the most talented. It's the people who have some level of talent, who can execute, and who are working extremely hard to be good at what they're doing. That's why they tend to get ahead.
And if you want to shortcut that by obtaining freebies, the unintended consequences are horrible.
Yes.
And I think we have an obligation. I have an obligation to tell your fellow citizens what happened in my country. I hope some of them.
I think you do too.
I hope some of them hear this, and I can't thank you enough, Jim, for this time and for making this note. I'm gonna put them on the podcast, on the comment section, and I hope at least somebody here is out there.
Yes, and we'll get the link so people can actually go get their own copy of it and be able to have it on their phone or be able to have it on their computer or have it printed out and that to me is spreading the word is very powerful.
I'm sure this is not the last time we're going to talk in these studios.
All right.
Thank you.
Manuel, thank you. I'm humbled by the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me make sure he closes right.
All right. Thank you, Diego. We appreciate your help this evening.